Welcome to an Emergency Preparedness Update. My name is Christine Connolly, and I'm the Director of Health and Human Services for the town of Arlington. Arlington is a member of the Battle Road Regional Emergency Planning Committee, and as a member of that committee, we sit with members from other communities. I have here today with me those members from the other communities, and they are Fire Chief McCaffrey from the town of Bedford, Fire Chief Middlemiss from the town of Lexington, and Assistant Fire Chief Davison from the town of Belmont. I have these members from the committee here today, and we will be discussing some of the topics that we've been working on through the Battle Road Emergency Planning Committee. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I want to start by asking, what is the Battle Road Regional Emergency Planning Committee?
The Battle Road Emergency Planning Committee was put together as in response to our needs in each of our individual communities to have a certified emergency planning committee in place. In order to do this, each of our communities looked at doing it on an individual basis or on a group basis. So the towns of Bedford, Arlington, Lexington, and Belmont originally formed the Battle Road Committee. Since then, we've been joined by Burlington, Watertown, and soon to come Brookline and Newton. Our responsibility is to plan and to act in the event of any hazardous materials release or any emergency where we may be called upon to play a role.
Okay. What is the difference between the Regional Emergency Planning Committee and the Local Emergency Planning Committee?
I guess I can take that. Again, going back to Massachusetts gave the recommendation that each town have their own emergency planning committee. It's required by law, by regulation. But when we decided to realize how difficult it was for one small community like Bedford to do all the things required to become a certified emergency planning committee, we said that there's no way we could do that. So the regional approach was the best approach, and it was a matter of deciding how big that region should be. And in our case, we tried to keep it on the small side, 4 or 5 communities initially, up to 10. If it gets much more over 10, it really becomes a kind of a problem to collect all the information and to get it to be certified, which is our whole entire goal here. You know, as far as this updated part of our planning committee is to get a complete certification, which entitles us to accreditation with CERC, which is the Massachusetts version.
And what are the agencies that are involved in the planning? I know I'm with Public Health and I'm a member, and you are all from the fire departments. What are the other agencies that are part of this group?
There are 13 disciplines, is what you call them, that have to be part of any emergency planning committee, and they include local officials, elected or appointed officials, law enforcement, emergency medical services, fire services, public health, local environmental disciplines, hospitals and healthcare, transportation, media, community groups, representatives of the actual facilities that use these reportable quantities in public works. So we basically, and one other that we mentioned, we all basically, I think, fit those disciplines as emergency management. Many of us serve and have different disciplines. In order for us to meet, we have to maintain, it's a public meeting, and we have to maintain at least 7 of those disciplines out of the 13 have to participate in each and every meeting that we have.
Great.
That's actually been an advantage of doing it on a regional basis, is we have more of a pool of these different disciplines to pull from. When we were doing it all as local committees, if you didn't have to start out with the 13 disciplines available and then with conflicts of meetings and things like that, you couldn't get everybody there. Your meetings were somewhat infrequent and not as productive as you'd like them to be.
Okay, so do each of your communities also have a local emergency planning committee still in effect, in addition to the regional?
Yes. We have a smaller committee that meets and talks about local hazards, local issues, whether it be pandemic flu or whether it be And I threw that one out because of, the health.
Yeah.
See how we did that? But there are other issues that may not be, you can't plan for in the broad base. But one thing about any and all emergencies is they don't stop just because there's a town line. That town line isn't a barrier to issues. So what may affect Lexington is going to affect Arlington, is going to affect Bedford, is going to affect Belmont. And it's a ripple effect, and that's one of the advantages of planning as a region as well.
And so as a group, I know that we've been doing some plans to do an exercise to sort of practice what we have on paper. Can somebody just sort of give a little outline of that plan?
Since I'm the chairman of the planning committee, I guess that goes to me. Basically, as part of the certification, we're required to have, at the final end, an exercise. But there's a step-by-step process to go through to get your certification, which incorporates, first of all, us as a group getting together, having all the disciplines there, making a plan to get all the communities to be able to go to the next step, which is a tabletop exercise. Basically, we need to have an exercise, and the first step is to have a tabletop version where there are no chemicals released, there are no people running around, no radio traffic, no anything other than at the tabletop what's going on. Basically, it's a drill before the actual exercise. The same pieces are there, the same people are there, and the same incident will be there. Whatever the planning committee decides to be to meet the certification, we're going to have at this tabletop exercise. And the idea of having the regional group is to have all the players from the regional. Now, if you took it back to my local planning committee, that would be a major task to perform with the small group that we have of, say, 6 or 7 individuals that are the local emergency planning committee. So when you talk about something on the scale of this, which may involve, 5 or 6 or 8 communities, one group of 4 or 5 can't do the job. We need the whole entire group to be able to participate. So we'll do the tabletop exercise first. We basically go through all the issues, have an after-action report, see what happened. Did we actually meet our goals? Did we solve the problem? Were all the communities taken care of? Were there any issues through this tabletop exercise that we need to work on before we get to an actual exercise? And even at that, when we go to the exercise, we're going to repeat the whole same thing over again and hopefully learn from how we go about it. And also, what's good about the exercise is it gets all of us to know each other. And the rest of the people will be involved that aren't part of our committee, but they're going to be the players in the incident. And they need to know who we are, and we need to know who they are, especially if a disaster of this proportion strikes. We're not talking to somebody we've never seen before. And that's the whole idea of the planning portion of it, so we're all on the same page. And when the exercise comes, that we know the players involved.
Will there be an evaluator on hand to sort of evaluate the response and give us all pointers as to how we can improve our response for the next time?
Once we're completed the tabletop, it will be evaluated by an independent party, and we will receive both immediate evaluation points, and we'll receive an after-action report that will give us some points and what-ifs and how do we correct these and make it work better for us the next time.
Chief, I know that in Lexington a few years back you had a major incident, and I know that we've discussed this many times at our meetings, that had there been this regional planning committee, you would have done X, Y, and Z. Can you just tell us a little bit about your experience and really what you see this group doing in the future if this were to ever happen in another community?
Well, basically what happened, it's just about 2 years ago now, the beginning of next month, when we had a house explosion and a major natural gas involvement and interruption. It created a situation that was beyond our means to control. And we brought in a lot of outside resources. But what we learned after that when we sat down and talked, and we did our own what-if scenario at the end, was there were certain players that didn't have reliefs that were put in place. We took care of all the baseline stuff. We had plenty of fire support and personnel. But once we got out of the actual bottom tiers of everything, then we were running into problems. For instance, I worked basically 19 straight days, and for the first week I slept in my office. So there was a lot of time that was put in there that hopefully once this is enacted, is that maybe Kevin can come in and fill the role in my community in one of my two hats as either emergency management director or as fire chief. And maybe Angus can come in and serve the role in the other hat and let me out of there and sort of, not just let me out, but force, that's the key issue. I don't want to relinquish my event, and Kevin wouldn't want to relinquish his, and Angus wouldn't want to relinquish his. But the fact is that we have to have it in that you will go after a certain amount of hours and leave, and somebody else will fill that role for that period of time. And that's part of what we're looking at here. That was one of the forces that we learned right out after that, the event of November of a couple of years ago. So those are the type of things that we want to deal with.
And not only did he learn an active lesson from the ground level, it immediately affected Bedford because gas service was stopped to the transmission service was stopped to a portion of Bedford in the process because the line had to be shut down. Even though it was, only for a few hours, it still affected us in the aspect because the lines just don't go through Lexington; they go to everywhere else, too. So, and never mind all the resources from as far away as Belmont and Cambridge, and that had to come in to help out and relieve some of his crews that had been working for 48 hours straight. And I think if we didn't, mutual aid works great on the fire service, but all the other services that were affected, inspectional services, DPW, health department had to go in there, things spoiled that when businesses had to be shut down. And so we needed to draw more than just one health agent. We need to have 4 or 5 health agents or 4 and 5 building inspectors to go in there because one person can't handle it. So with this large group that we have now, it's much easier to go and pick those people out of those communities and who know us and can go over there as a group and take care of the problem. Before that, we would just have to do it by phone, and he'd call me, I'd call him, or he'd call Angus. And we know each other, but we don't know how everything works. I think when you have a planning committee that holds that all together, it's a much smoother transition when the big one does hit.
I think it really opened our eyes just from the Lexington incident where Bill brought up this question of, well, who comes in my spot? And it opened it up to the other communities to look at their plans and their operations and say, oh, wait a minute. Okay, if I have to now step out of that spot, who can come in here? So there's been a lot of talk in many different communities about regionalization. It's usually about purchasing or fire service or police service or something of that line. But that takes a lot of work and rearrangement. And this committee and the program that this committee is putting together really can address it in a workable solution, and it doesn't take a lot of rearranging. We're all doing the same thing, and it's just a matter of taking the municipal boundaries out of the picture. But I think we're well on our way to getting that to really mesh.
So are there mutual aid agreements already in place for fire chiefs?
For fire chiefs?
Yes.
No. For fire departments, yes.
Yes.
That is something that we believe in. The committee, as we've talked about many a times, and that's something that we would put into our existing plans, is that we would have mutual aid for fire chiefs to cover ourselves in our operations, but at the same time, keep in mind that most of the chiefs are also the emergency management directors for their communities. So already they're sitting in 2 different roles, at least at that point. And what we would see in my particular town is my assistant chief would become the chief of the department. I would move over to emergency management director, but we still would be working a lengthy period of time. Your normal event would probably last maybe 10 hours most. The abnormal event, what happened in Lexington 2 years ago, what happened in Danvers this past summer, what happened in, was it Sutton? Was
Yes.
the other, Sutton?
Yeah.
the same thing, which was another hazardous materials in a mills fire situation. Those events didn't stop in that 10 hours. We have to make it a point to give relief to those that are in charge in order to keep the operation functional. And that's part of what we're looking at with these plans.
I mean, you take those 13 disciplines that we have in the group and multiply that times 13 more, times 13 more, times 13 more. And technically, the way the state has worked it out is that our small regional planning committee could be relieved by another regional planning committee to come in and relieve those people. And because we're all doing it the same way. We all have the Tier 2 reports. We all have the plan in place. It's written out on a state format. So that technically, if you were in another regional planning committee, you would know what the health portion of it is. So you could go and step in their shoes. Same for law enforcement or for fire chiefs or emergency medical services or any one of the other disciplines. You could step into another regional planning committee in an easy transition because it's all done on the same template. Everything that gets done is put into a simple book. Flip the page. That's my responsibilities. You already know that because of this planning committee. And that's why it's done on a regional basis, because there's so much effort to get put into it that one person can't do it all.
You know, keep in mind, if we go back to the event of 2 years ago in Lexington, it was our health department, and I'm going to turn this off of the fire service. It just happens to be 3 of us sitting here, but our health department worked for 7 or 8, 10 days themselves during that period of time. Our gas inspector had 13 or 14. He had to go calling people to get gas inspectors to come in and give him a hand during that event. This would allow us to have in place active mutual aid agreements between our communities because we're part of a regional committee. Mm-hmm. It would also allow us to have in place an active plan to secure that assistance if we then needed it later on. So there are a lot of things that we do need to go and do because of this. But the planning committee itself is formed because of hazardous materials releases. That's what the plan is about. But if you take the word hazardous materials out of it, you can probably interject pandemic. You could interject bioterrorism. You could interject some other, but it gives us a foundation of a plan to work with.
Absolutely. And we all know each other now, and we're able to sort of pick up the phone and say, we need help in Arlington, or you need help in Belmont. I think that's really a valuable point that people can take away from this.
That's the big piece of it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the state. Is there any state funding that has come through as a result of coming together?
We've received, and I'm not sure whether we've received the funds yet, but we've received the $1,000 in planning money that we could use for the tabletop, or we could use for other things. But we've been notified that we're eligible for and have been granted, and whether they've actually transferred those funds yet, I don't know.
Okay. And are there any federal grants out there that our group can apply for to possibly hire somebody in the future to manage the
There may be. I haven't looked at it, but I do know that without this, it limits some of the federal grants, highway grants, for instance, that are out on the roads. You actually have to have an emergency plan in place for those to be eligible for those. So whether this actually opens the door up to new grants, I don't know, but it maintains the eligibility for past grants and others.
I know it's been mentioned in some of our meetings that it may not open up new ones, but the ones that are there may be more money available because you are a regional group as opposed to an individual community. The funding is sort of hard to track down. You've got to get through a lot of the language to actually ascertain whether it actually applies to your group or not. But the state has been very good with our group as far as guiding us and giving us direction and telling us what steps we've got to take. And it makes, in the scheme of things, it makes their job a lot easier. Rather than dealing with 8 communities, they now have 8 communities in one group, and it's a lot easier to keep track. So.
Yeah.
And that's one good thing, that the state has assigned somebody just to coordinate our group to get us through the process, because you need a little hand-holding going through the process to make sure that it gets done in a timely manner and doesn't get left out, or we're missing any pieces. And that's what's good about having somebody from the state who knows what the end product is supposed to be. Right now, we're not sure what the end product's going to be, although we know that it's going to have a plan that covers not only the hazardous materials, but that interaction and interchangement, that continuity of operations, if you will, where everything will work. And because it is a regional approach, again, he's only having to talk to one group versus talking to Bedford, Lexington, Belmont, and keep going down the line. Imagine how many meetings that would be. Just, we go to enough meetings as it is, that's for sure, as we talked about.
Absolutely. I don't know if we mentioned yet the names of the communities that are members yet. I don't know if you want to possibly throw
Bedford, Arlington, Burlington, Lexington, Belmont, Watertown, and Brookline is soon to join, and Newton is under discussion right now.
Okay, so there's 7 communities in total.
And a portion of Hanscom Air Base is
Right.
also a community, because it's a federal entity.
Are there any other groups similar to this across the state?
There are, I believe, didn't he say 6 other regional groups? But primarily, most of the larger cities and towns have their own.
Okay.
They have the manpower, and they have the structure, and they have the funding to be able to put one together. I mean, you take the city of Boston, for instance. Might be a region in its own, and it tends to think it is that way too. And so, but they have their own committee, and they do their own thing, and they follow the same guidelines that we're going to follow, and have done the same things to be certified. So,
Adjacent to us is the Mystic River. To our east, that's a committee that is basically a year old, and forming at the same time alongside us is up the Greater Lowell in the Merrimack Valley. Those are the 2 that are closest to us right now.
In actuality, that one was part of our original group, and we decided it was going to be too large an area to cover, so we split it in half, and
Right.
we still grew.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. The Greater Lowell was part of our original deciding group whether we decided to for our regional committee, but we realized that that time to take in large communities like that would be tougher in the
Yeah.
process.
Where we're at right now, there is actually 3 steps of certification that we're required to have. And we've completed our startup certification, which makes us eligible for funding. And we have provisional, which is the next. We have to accomplish either provisional or full certification within a year. So we're actually looking at, we discussed last week, we may be looking at being a little energetic and completing the full certification. The reality is it becomes less work by being that much more energetic. So we're looking for that certification come April of this year.
Now, I know that the state has been broken up into many, many different regions, and various disciplines have been grouped into various regions. I know public health, we're in Region 4B, which are the cities that surround the city of Boston. I know fire has a different region, police has a different region. Then we have our Homeland Security region. So how would you say that this committee is different from all of those other regions that are out there?
Well, it's another region, but as far as the fire, we're all in the same MEMA region.
Yes.
So we started out, that's not too bad. The health region, I believe we're in 2 different ones.
Yes.
The fire regions, all but the town of Bedford is in 1, but we'll let them.
Yeah, it's 100 yards different.
It's yeah. So for the most part, that was one of the things that we looked at. We wanted to stay within all of one region if we could, or very small parts of another region. So we did pretty well on that.
Okay. Is there anything else that any of you would like to share with us before we end the show?
The only thing that I would suggest is if anybody has any questions, you can contact your local fire departments for your Tier 2 reports, which is actually the driving agent of this, or you can contact my office, which is the office for the Battle Road Emergency Planning Committee, and that's at 45 Bedford Street in Lexington.
And again, my name is Christine Connolly, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in today. I'm the Director of Health and Human Services in the town of Arlington. I'd like to thank Assistant Chief Davison from Belmont, Chief Middlemiss from Lexington, and Chief McCaffrey from Bedford. Thank you.